Okay, so you should have just finished your graphic organizer looking at Akbar and the contributions he made to Indian society, bringing in culture from the Islamic world and starting to mix that with Indian culture. So what we're going to look at for our notes is India's empire. So how India kind of expanded during this time period from around zero to basically the 13, 14, 1500s. So pause this for a second and write down those three questions for yourself. All right, we will now begin by responding to these questions. But before we do that, I'm going to show you this picture and I wanted to ask you, what is this building? And after doing the activity, you should have some familiarity with this. You should be able to recognize that this building is the Taj Mahal, which is one of the most famous buildings in all of India. It's a very recognizable landmark, and we're going to address that more as we start to develop the ideas of how the Islamic world started to influence Indian culture, because this building is an example of the fusing of those two cultures during this time period. So let's start by looking at some of the early successes of the Indian Empire. So the first bullet for the first question is Alexander the Great. His name is up on the screen for you. Alexander the Great tried to conquer India in 327 BCE for the Common Era, but was driven out by the newly established Mauryan Empire. Up there on the screen for you. So Alexander the Great, who was Macedonian and a great kind of ruler of that time, coming and expanding their empire, tried to conquer India. However, he was unable to do so because the Mauryans were able to basically hold him off. And a lot of that was due to their great leader, Asoka. So for the second bullet, I want you to write Mauryan Empire, and then put a dash after that. And then we're going to write Asoka. His name is down there in the bottom left. I would underline it for yourself. And then put a comma after his name and write considered to be the greatest ruler. Considered to be the greatest ruler in the history of India. Greatest ruler in the history of India, comma, was a kind ruler. Who expanded the empire to the current size of India. Expanded the empire to the current size of India. So Asoka is considered a great ruler. He did many things during his time. He was very compassionate for others, very tolerant of other faiths. That's where we start to see more Buddhist temples popping up. If you look to the right, that picture there is of a Buddhist temple. And he was just a very kind, compassionate leader for his people. He established different social policies to benefit the people, different agricultural policies, so all different kinds of things that would help them better themselves of the time. So that has given him the title of the greatest ruler in India's history. Now, some people, especially Westerners, would argue maybe differently, but that is the title that he has. The second empire that we're going to look at is the Kushan Empire. The Kushan Empire. So write that as the next bullet and then put a dash after it. And for the Kushan Empire, we're going to say used the Silk Road, which is down at the bottom of your screen, used the Silk Road to increase trade, throughout Asia, comma, the Middle East, comma, and the Roman Empire. And made India rich. So the Kushan Empire benefited from the time period of trade and the use of the Silk Road, which the Silk Road, if you look up on your screen, is all the different routes that people would be traveling from the Western world, which is actually the eastern part of the Roman Empire, all the way across to the Eastern world, which included both the Middle East, and then further east, India, and then even further east, China. And India obviously was benefiting from that because we talked about before how they had many different natural resources that were of great demand, like cotton, as well as spices and all kinds of different things that were going to be significant trades. So the Kushan Empire basically made India a very wealthy state at that time. So that was going to benefit them economically. And then the last of the major empires and their successes of that time is the Gupta Empire. So let's write this one down and put a dash after it. The Gupta Empire. And this time period was a scientific revolution in India. Scientific revolution in India. And two of the things that they did, and so you can just write this right after either in parentheses or number it 1, 2, is that in math, they discovered the zero and decimals. Math, zero, and decimals. So that was a huge mathematical discovery, for the world. And then a scientific discovery that they had was that they were able to set bones. So like if you break a bone, they were able to find a way to basically set them so that you could heal those bones again, and then they'd be, pretty much good as new. So that was a huge discovery as well. So the Gupta Empire is known as the scientific revolution of that time period. So those are some of the early empires that were doing great things for the time. And then we see Islam start to spread into India. So let's talk about how that happened. So we're on the second question now, the first bullet. Islam began expanding from the Middle East, further eastward, into parts of the Persian Empire. And Persian Empire is at the bottom of the screen for you. Into parts of the Persian Empire. And so that would include, if you want to note this in parentheses, the current day territories of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So you can see that on the map up there. Afghanistan and Pakistan are kind of on the edge there, and then India's a little bit further southeast from that. So basically Islam spreading in the territories right beside India. And then the second bullet, after the fall of the Gupta Empire, after the fall of the Gupta Empire, comma, the ruthless leader, Timur Lenk, and his name is right there on the screen for you, and that's his picture. The ruthless leader, Timur Lenk, led military conquests through India, and took over much of the territory. Led military conquests through India and took over much of the territory. So Timur Lenk basically came through and started kind of leading these military campaigns through India and taking over the territory very quickly. And he was able to kind of fiercely do that. And then once he did, he would kind of establish his, other Muslim leaders as kind of the ruling class within India. So he kind of then put them in positions of power to dominate over society. And if you think about the people of India with their caste system, so for Muslims to come in and kind of break that was to some dismay of the people initially. So the third bullet is, we would say, the Muslim invaders viewed themselves as the ruling class, as they knew they would be unable to convert. So many Hindus. So they recognized that the Hindus were very dedicated to their faith and that they probably wouldn't be able to, dominate them without some type of motive. And that's where then this next part came along, where they started to kind of get some people interested in them being in power. And that's this bullet. Many Hindus were poor peasants and farmers. Comma, but merchants were able to gain wealth. So basically what they did is they realized that the bottom classes in their society were viewed as being, not very significant. But if they empowered the upper classes, and especially that middle class, the Vyasas, then they were going to kind of not meet as much resistance, which was kind of a smart political move on their part. So they gained a lot of support from the people, and that allowed them to start to kind of expand and do different things within the empire, which is what you were reading about in the reading as some of the contributions. And one of the most famous contributions is that Taj Mahal. So this is the last bullet we're going to write for this question. In the 1600s, the Muslim rulers the Muslim rulers expanded India's size into parts of Persia. Expanded India's size into parts of Persia. Semicolon. So basically, they were starting to take some of that territory, especially the territory of Pakistan, which is going to be important when we talk about kind of some of the relationships and things that happened after this. So keep that in your mind, that they're going to include India and kind of Pakistan in making this territory even larger. Semicolon after Persia. And then I want you to write the Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal was built, which is a blend. The Taj Mahal was built, which is a blend of Indian and Persian architecture. Of Indian and Persian architecture. And so the Taj Mahal is kind of the encompassing monument both to the blending of these two cultures, as well as kind of the interesting story behind the Taj Mahal, which is that it was built as kind of an homage to the ruler of India at the time, his wife, who had died, and it was his beloved wife. He loved her very much, and she passed away, and he wanted to honor her with something that would be as beautiful as her. And so he built the Taj Mahal kind of as his declaration of love for her, to be more or less a mausoleum for her, which is kind of like a tomb, so to speak. And it's a great symbol. A lot of people go there and visit and, believe that it's a sign of beauty and eternal love and things like that. But it is just a gorgeous building at that. And the architecture is very nice and very famous as well. So we got the Taj Mahal, which represents the blending of Indian and Persian, culture, this, building of the two. And so that's something to think about as well. But then we have, this blend of the cultures, but then another culture is going to come in and influence India, which is the British. So this is question 3. So the first bullet is the year 1650. 1650. And then put a little dash after that, and we're going to write the British began to establish trading ports. The British began to establish trading ports. So basically along the coast of India and some other territories, the British started coming in and setting up these trading ports where they could, trade resources with different places and things like that, because the British was starting to kind of grow as a power of that time. And then that leads us to a company that's going to develop there, which is the East India Company. So this is the second bullet, the East India Company. Their name is on the screen, and I would underline that for yourself. Was a privately owned British trading company. Privately owned British trading company that wanted more control. Over India's resources. Wanted more control over India's resources. So they started to take note of the fact that there was a lot of great resources in India, natural resources like we had discussed before, that were going to be big money makers for the East India Company. And that ranged from everything, like we said before, from cotton to spice to tea to all kinds of different things. So they decided, we want more control. So what they did is they more or less, started taking over more and more resources until the Indian people rebelled, which is the third bullet. When the Indian people rebelled, they attacked them. And established more trading areas. Which is highlighted if you look on that map. All the pink would be those areas that they started to take over, which is all along, the different trade routes and areas of, precise control. And then the last thing we want to note is that the East India Company was gaining economic and political power over India. It's gaining economic and political power over India. And so that's going to be important because the East India Company, which is a British company, gaining more power in India, is going to kind of lay the foundation and lay the groundwork for them to come in and take control of India. And so we'll be talking about that more in section 4, some of the things that they were doing in India to establish and maintain control and the eventual rebellion of the people for their independence. So at this time, you can close up your notebooks and we will do our section quizzes in class.